The day I transmigrated into the body of Asher Vaughn, the male lead of a trashy romance novel with the same name, was the day I learned my fate. In 6 months, you will be bankrupt and destined to jump off a bridge. I looked at my cold, distant wife, Ilara Sterling, with whom I had a marriage contract and slept in separate rooms. A slim waist, long legs, pale skin, stunningly beautiful. The original Asher must have been a complete moron to give her the cold shoulder. I snatched the divorce agreement and tore it to shreds. While we were still married, I started sneaking into the master bedroom every night. "What do you think you're doing?" she'd ask, her voice like ice. "Fulfilling my husbandly duties," I'd say, completely shameless. Lights out, the bed would creak. 6 months came and went, and I waited for bankruptcy. Instead, Ilara threw a pregnancy test on my desk. Thinking of leaving me, I could get the child. You get nothing. Then, her hand went to her slightly swelling belly. "Stay. Be the father." Asher Vaughn opened his eyes. His head was splitting. He was lying on expensive silk sheets. The air smelled of cool, clean sandalwood. He shot upright. Memories flooded his mind like a tidal wave. He'd been transmigrated into an old-school, trope-filled drama. He was the male lead. The standard package, blind and heartless, obsessed with his first love, emotionally abusive to his wife, followed by the inevitable grovel fest to win her back. According to the plot, tomorrow was the day he and his legal wife, Ilara Sterling, were scheduled to sign the final divorce papers. After that, his perfect first love would screw him over, leaving him broke and crippled in a hospital bed. And his wife, the one whose heart he'd shattered but who still loved him to death, would swallow her pride and resentment to come back and take care of him. After a mountain of melodrama, he would finally see the light, successfully win her back, and achieve their so-called happily ever after. "Happily ever after, my ass," Asher muttered. "Inflict the pain, then grovel for forgiveness. Some other idiot could walk that path." His eyes swept across the bedroom. It was obnoxiously luxurious. His gaze landed on the cool silhouette at the vanity. Ilara Sterling, his wife in name only, the archetypal devoted female lead. Right now, she was pinning up her long, dark hair, revealing the delicate, porcelain-white column of her neck. The cold mirror reflected her emotionless profile. She was breathtakingly beautiful and just as unapproachably cold. On the corner of her vanity, 2 signed copies of the divorce agreement sat waiting for tomorrow's official exchange. Asher's eyes darkened. If he was stuck here, why the hell should he follow the original script? He swung his legs out of bed. His feet sank into the plush Persian rug, making no sound as he approached. Ilara seemed to spot him in the mirror. She set down a jade hairpin and stood, about to walk away. "Wait," Asher said, his voice rough with sleep. Ilara froze, but didn't turn around. Her slender, straight back was like a sheet of ice. Asher stepped in front of her, blocking her path. He was a full head taller, forcing him to look down at her. Up close, her beauty was even more striking. Flawless, pale skin, dark hair that made her face seem smaller. Her lips were a faint pink, and her long, thick lashes were lowered, hiding the eyes that, in the novel, were always filled with restrained love and hidden pain. Right now, they held nothing but a frozen stillness. The stillness of someone who had completely given up on the Asher of the original story. "The papers," she said, her voice like shattered crystal. Clear, cold, and devoid of warmth. "I saw them," Asher replied, but his gaze drifted downwards against his will, tracing the line of her delicate collarbones and the curves defined by her silk robe. A waist that looked like it could be spanned by his hands. Below that, long, elegant legs ending in bare feet, her perfect toes curling slightly into the carpet. Asher licked his dry lips. A wicked thought began to sprout. Since she wouldn't be his wife tomorrow, that meant their marriage was, for now, very much real and legally binding. The original Asher hadn't touched a single hair on her head, pathetically saving himself for his so-called first love. It had ruined them both. Asher scoffed. "What a waste. A monumental waste." "Ilara Sterling," he said suddenly, calling her by her full name. His tone was low, carrying an authority that couldn't be ignored. Ilara finally looked up at him. Those crystalline eyes were sharp and frigid, holding no emotion at all. She looked like a perfect, lifeless statue. Asher took another step, closing the distance until he was almost pressed against her. He could smell the clean, sharp scent coming off her, like pine needles after a snowstorm. "I've changed my mind," he said, watching her pupils contract in a flicker of surprise. "This divorce." He paused deliberately. As he expected, a flash of confusion crossed her face, quickly replaced by deeper suspicion and ridicule, as if to say, "What kind of game are you playing now?" Asher's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist as she tried to pull back. Her skin was cool and smooth. He tightened his grip, pulling her irresistibly towards him until she stumbled into his chest. The feeling of her soft body against his, separated only by thin silk, was electrifyingly clear. Alara's body went rigid, like a fully drawn bow. Her eyes were no longer just cold. They were filled with shock, disbelief, and a flicker of panic she couldn't hide. "Asher," she said his name for the first time, her voice tight with suppressed fury and disbelief, the end of it trembling slightly. "What are you doing?" "Sho." Asher lowered his head, his hot breath ghosting over the sensitive shell of her ear. He felt a satisfying tremor run through her. "What am I doing?" he chuckled. "Isn't it obvious?" His voice was a low murmur, thick with an aggressive, predatory suggestion. Then, under her widening, horrified gaze, he swept her off her feet and into his arms. "I'm doing what a husband and wife are supposed to do." Ignoring the way she stiffened in his arms, her struggles both futile and weak. "Asher, you're insane. Put me down. We're getting divorced tomorrow. What is the point of this?" Asher paid her no mind. He carried her the few steps to the ridiculously large bed and tossed her onto it. She bounced lightly on the plush mattress, her dark hair fanning out across the pure white sheets like a splash of despairing ink. Her silk robe had fallen open, revealing a sight that was both breathtaking and so fragile it made you want to break it completely. Alara clutched the lapels of her robe, trying to cover herself as she scrambled backward. The composed, self-possessed look in her crystalline eyes was completely shattered, replaced by terror, humiliation, and utter disbelief. "Don't touch me. Get away." Her voice grew sharp, an attempt to armor herself with coldness, but the trembling gave away her helplessness. Asher stood by the bed and untied the belt of his own robe, revealing a hard, toned chest with lean, powerful muscles. He leaned forward, pressing one knee onto the mattress and crawling toward her, his presence utterly overwhelming, like a predator about to devour its prey. His shadow fell over her, and his potent, masculine scent was everywhere. "A divorce?" He reached out. "We still have about 12 hours, don't we?" Asher let out a low laugh, his eyes sharp, locking onto her panicked ones. "In such a hurry to get rid of your husband?" "Or..." He leaned in closer, his lips almost brushing her earlobe as he breathed hot air against her skin. "Is it a guilty conscience? Are you afraid of me touching you? What are you so worried about?" Alara was shaking more violently now, not from cold, but from the naked implication in his words and the mortification of being seen through. She bit her lower lip, nearly drawing blood, and turned her head away like a cornered animal, stubborn and fragile. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice cold and hard, but it couldn't hide the weakness behind her bluff. Asher didn't give her another chance to speak. He gripped her chin, forcing her to face him and crush his lips down on hers. Dawn's first light peeked through a gap in the heavy velvet curtains, casting a thin, golden line across the carpet. The bedroom was filled with a mixture of scents, the expensive, cool sandalwood now tangled with something richer, more primal. The vast bed was a mess. The silk sheets were hopelessly wrinkled, and a few strands of dark hair lay broken on the pillow. Alara was lying on her side at the edge of the bed, her back to Asher. The thin blanket only covered her to her waist, revealing a canvas of smooth, pale skin marred with the dark, telltale marks of their night. Her shoulder blades were exquisite, rising and falling gently, like a butterfly resting its wings, so delicate it seemed a single touch could shatter them. Asher was propped up against the headboard, a freshly lit cigarette between his fingers. He hadn't taken a drag. Smoke curled upwards, blurring the hard lines of his face. His gaze was calm as it swept over the jarring marks on her back before settling on her stubborn, silent form. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room, broken only by the occasional chirp of a bird outside. It was as if the wild, desperate struggle of the previous night had been nothing more than a bad dream. Asher blew out a ring of smoke, his eyes falling on the nightstand. Those two cold divorce agreements. They sat there conspicuously like a pair of merciless judges. He stubbed out the cigarette, reached over, and picked up his copy. The paper rustled in his fingers. Alara's body tensed, an almost imperceptible movement, but one that didn't escape Asher's notice. A silent, cruel smirk played on his lips. R.I.P. The sharp, grating sound of tearing paper exploded in the dead quiet room like a thunderclap. Alara's body jolted as if struck by an invisible whip. She could no longer maintain her frozen composure. She whipped around, her messy hair falling across her pale face. Her crystalline eyes were wide with shock and confusion, staring at Asher, at the divorce agreement in his hands being slowly, methodically torn into pieces. The scraps fluttered down onto the carpet like hopeless white butterflies. Silent, yet deafening. "You," she choked out, unable to form a complete word. Her lips were pressed into a thin, bloodless line, and her chest heaved with a mixture of repressed fury and the humiliation of being played with. After last night, she thought this degrading chapter was finally over, that she could seal it away forever. That signed agreement was her only shield, her final pardon. It was her ticket to leaving this nightmarish place with what little was left of her shattered dignity. To escape the man named Asher Vaughn. She had it all planned out. For the moment the sun rose, she would be gone from this place forever. But now, that agreement, her only way out, had been destroyed. By his own hands, right in front of her, with such arrogance, such contempt, such cruelty. The shock left her mind completely blank. The blood drained from her face, leaving it burning with shame. It felt as if all the strength had been sucked out of her, leaving only the dull, pounding ache of her heart against her ribs. "Asher!" She practically screamed his name, her voice raw and hoarse, like the last cry of a dying animal. "What is the meaning of this? Are you insane? You're a monster." She threw off the blanket and scrambled off the bed, her bare feet hitting the cold carpet. All she wanted was to run, to get away from this suffocating room, away from this terrifying madman. But an iron grip clamped down on her delicate wrist. Asher yanked her back, effortlessly overpowering her and throwing her back onto the large bed. The soft mattress sank under her weight, trapping her in the small space between him and the bed, unable to move. Insane, Asher pinned both of her slender wrists above her head, holding them against the cold, upholstered headboard. With his other hand, his calloused fingertips traced a line over her skin with a familiarity that made her shudder. He lowered his head, his nose almost touching hers, his dark eyes drinking in the fear in hers. His deep voice was raspy from the cigarette, and the hot air he exhaled felt like it was scorching her soul. "This is insane, my dear Alara." His fingers deliberately pressed harder on the most prominent mark he'd left on her skin, and he watched with satisfaction as her chest rose and fell in ragged breaths of humiliation and rage. "Last night, you sounded so sweet." "So what's this?" he drawled, his breath even closer now, his lips almost touching the corner of her trembling mouth. "The moment you're out of my bed, you're already eager to be my ex-wife." The pain from his grip, the crushing weight of his body, the deliberate cruelty in his words. It was all a barrage of cold, sharp needles piercing through the defenses she'd so carefully built. "Don't do this, Asher." She tried to struggle, but he had her completely pinned, like a fish on a cutting board. Every twist and squirm only seemed to fuel his fire, accomplishing nothing. The power imbalance was too great. Her resistance only earned her a sharper pain in her wrists and a darker, more terrifying flame in his eyes. His gaze was like a physical touch, slowly raking over her, from the strap of her robe that had slipped off her shoulder to the shameful marks beneath. He looked like he was admiring a piece of art he had branded as his own, his eyes full of possessive aggression. "Don't do what?" Asher laughed, a cold sound full of unchecked power. Tearing it up, his gaze finally lifted from her skin, landing on the pile of white scraps on the floor as if it were a pile of trash. "Was just a way to remind you of one thing." He looked back at her, locking his eyes on her pale, humiliated, and terrified face. He spoke each word with chilling clarity, like a cold blade carving a message into her heart. From now on, until the day we go get new papers with the word divorce stamped on them. He dipped his head slightly, his warm lips brushing against her cold forehead, causing her to flinch violently. You, Ilara Sterling, are still my lawfully wedded wife. Understand, sweetheart. The word sweetheart, coming from his lips, was like a poison-tipped needle dipped in honey, stabbing deep into her heart with a sweet, agonizing pain. Her fingertips went numb. A chill spread through her entire body. A month later, Asher was in his study, working through a backlog of documents. The crisp sound of his keyboard echoed in the spacious room. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sun was shining, finally breaking through days of city gloom. Everything was calm and orderly. Knock, knock. A soft knock on the study door. Come in, Asher said without looking up. The door opened, but it wasn't the butler or a maid. It was Ilara. She was wearing a tailored cream-colored cashmere dress, her dark hair loosely pinned up, revealing the elegant curve of her neck. Her face was still pale, but she seemed to have filled out a little. The sharp line of her jaw had softened. She walked silently on soft slippers, like a hesitant cat, and stopped in front of his massive mahogany desk. Asher glanced up. His eyes fell on her hands, clasped nervously in front of her, and then to her eyes, where a storm of emotion was raging beneath a carefully constructed mask of calm. Fear, confusion, and a sliver of the desperation that comes only when one is pushed to the absolute edge. Something I can help you with, he asked, stopping his typing. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers as he studied her. 6 of the past month, Ilara had lived in a world of her own, completely encased in ice. Aside from showing up for meals, she avoided being in the same room with him at all costs. She wouldn't even spare him a glance, let alone speak to him. It was as if tearing up the agreement had been an even deeper sin, one that had relegated him to a biohazard zone. For her to seek him out today, it wasn't for a friendly chat. Ilara took a deep breath, as if mustering all her courage. Her knuckles turned white as she clenched her fists. Finally, after preparing herself, she uncurled her right hand and slowly, as if it weighed 1,000 pounds, placed the white plastic stick she'd been holding onto the center of the desk. Asher's gaze snapped to it. His eyes locked on the small plastic test. 2 clear, bright red lines. They burned into his retinas like a branding iron. Even from a few feet away, the stark, vivid color screamed a fact that could derail everything. The air in the room instantly turned to glass. You could have heard a pin drop. The only sounds were the faint whisper of the wind outside and the sudden, tight thud of his own heart. He slowly lifted his gaze from the damning piece of plastic and looked back at Ilara's face. Her crystalline eyes were like shattered ice. Beneath the forced composure, a gaping void of panic had been ripped open. She looked like someone standing on the edge of a cliff, awaiting her sentence. Or rather, awaiting the next round of devastating humiliation and torture from the man in front of her. Asher stared at her in silence for a good 10 seconds. Time seemed to stretch and stall. He could clearly see the erratic rhythm of her breathing, the tiny flutter of her eyelashes, the bone-deep chill of terror emanating from her. Then he moved. No rage, no hysterics, not even a flicker of emotion. He pushed his chair back, stood, and walked around the large desk. Step by step, he closed the distance between them. His shadow fell over her, and his intimidating presence filled the air. Ilara flinched back instinctively, a frightened rabbit trying to escape a predator's scent. Her shoulders trembled, and she bit her bloodless lip. Just as she braced for a blow or a torrent of cruel words, Asher reached out. He didn't touch her. Instead, he picked up the heavy Cool Mont Blanc pen he always used. He hovered a nib over the signature line of a fresh set of divorce papers, drafted by his lawyer and delivered a week ago to replace the ones he destroyed. The black metal of the pen reflected the light from the window. Cold, sharp, final. Ilara's eyes were glued to the tip of that pen, as if it were the blade of a guillotine. A wave of terror washed over her, and she swayed on her feet, just as the pen was about to descend and deliver the death sentence to her heart. Click! With a soft, dismissive sound, Asher tossed the expensive pen onto the thick stack of papers. A small, blurry blot of ink spread across the clean white edge like an absurd punctuation mark. He looked up, not sparing the agreement another glance. His gaze finally landed back on Alara's eyes, wide with terror. His own reflection stared back at her from within their depths, impassive but lacking the destructive rage of before. So, Asher finally spoke, his voice low and almost unnervingly calm. But to Alara's frayed nerves, it was like a boulder dropped into a still lake, sending terrifying shockwaves through her. He took another step forward. The force of his presence made it hard for her to breathe. He leaned down, his handsome face close to hers, so close he could see the fine hairs on her skin and the fear magnified in her eyes. It felt as if in the next second, his fingers would either wrap around her throat or slap her across the face. Alara squeezed her eyes shut, her body rigid, bracing for the inevitable storm. But the expected pain never came. Instead, a brief, warm touch landed on her forehead. It was as light as a feather, yet it carried a searing heat that made her eyes fly open. Was that a kiss? A brief but very real kiss on her cold forehead. Alara was completely stunned, as if struck by lightning. Her mind went blank. All the fear, the despair, the mental wall she had built to withstand his cruelty, all of it was instantly shattered by that one, completely unexpected gesture. Asher straightened up, looking down at her, clearly enjoying the chaotic mix of shock, disbelief, and confusion on her face. She looked like a completely bewildered little animal. He raised an eyebrow, and a small but definite smirk touched his lips. His eyes held a pure, unadulterated, and wicked amusement. His voice was still low, but it seemed to carry a magical quality, cutting through the fog in her mind. Divorce? We're not getting a divorce. He watched as the color drained from her face, leaving it as white as paper, her expression a mixture of stupefied confusion. That lost look on her face pleased him immensely. I said. Asher stepped forward again, closing the last bit of distance between them. His large hand suddenly shot out, landing on her still flat stomach. Alara's body jolted, her pupils shrinking as if she'd been burned by a hot iron. She instinctively tried to pull away from his invasive touch, but his hand stayed firmly in place. The pressure wasn't heavy, but it held her with an undeniable finality. He leaned his head down again, his hot breath deliberately ghosting past her ear, his voice a low murmur, like a demon's whisper, fatally seductive and terrifyingly confident. My wife, and my child. His lips brushed against her earlobe, sending a shiver of electricity down her spine. Are right here. He pulled back just enough to look her in the eye. His dark gaze was filled with pure amusement, like a hunter who had found the most interesting prey, and it held her own unfocused, shocked stare. So what's there to divorce? Alara was frozen to the spot. The phantom pressure of his hand seemed to linger on her wrist, while the searing heat from his palm on her stomach felt like a brand. The warmth of his breath still tingled on her ear, but all of it paled in comparison to the naked declaration in his words. Every syllable was like an ice pick, hammering through her crumbling defenses. She found her voice. It was hoarse, broken, and trembling with disbelief. What are you saying? What child? Her panicked gaze darted from the glaring pregnancy test on the desk back to his face, which was now fixed with an unyielding, possessive smile. Asher, she suddenly shoved at the hand on her stomach, a move that filled her with dread. Look at it. It was one time. It's impossible. This can't be happening. That desperate, self-destructive cry was like a drop of water hitting a hot skillet. It sizzled and exploded. The smile vanished from Asher's face as if it had been wiped clean. A dangerous frost formed in the depths of his dark eyes. The temperature in the study seemed to plummet. His arm tightened around her, no longer a caress, but an iron clamp. He yanked her against him, their bodies colliding with no space between them. Alara let out a muffled gasp as she hit his rock-hard chest. Her chin was jerked up by his long, cold fingers, forcing her to look into his now stormy eyes. The chilling intent swirling within them was enough to freeze her blood. Alara Sterling. He bit out each word, his voice laced with ice, low and dangerous, as if ground between his teeth. Take that back. Take that ridiculous idea. his cold thumb pressed against her skin. And dig it. Completely. Out of that pretty little head of yours. He stared at her pale, horrified face. Remember this. Asher leaned in even closer, his nose almost touching hers, his predatory gaze capturing hers. The air he breathed out was like a winter wind from hell. Besides me, his other hand, covered by the soft cashmere of her dress, once again cupped her flat stomach. This time, it was a gesture of absolute possession. No one has the guts. His cold gaze slid over her face like the edge of a blade, but his lips curved into what could almost be called a gentle smile. It was like a poppy blooming in the darkness, beautiful and deadly. Or the damn luck. He whispered, like a lover sharing a secret, but every word was a knife. To get you pregnant. In his arms, Ilara trembled like a leaf in an autumn wind. A powerful fear seized her throat, making it hard to breathe. Her beautiful, crystalline eyes were filled with shattered light and a fragile, teetering despair. The study door was thrown open. The butler, Mr. Peterson, rushed in without even knocking, his face etched with anxiety. "Sir, ma'am." He froze when he saw the scene in the room. The two of them pressed together in a tense, intimate embrace, the suffocatingly low pressure emanating from Asher, and Ilara trembling in his arms, her face as white as a sheet. Mr. Peterson hesitated, but the news he carried was clearly too urgent to wait. He stood in the doorway, braving the icy, dagger-like glare Asher shot him, and forced the words out. "Sir, it's Miss Morgan." Mr. Peterson's voice was rushed. "She was in a car accident. They just took her to Midtown General for emergency surgery. It's critical. The hospital called." He glanced quickly at the rigid form of Ilara in Asher's arms, his voice dropping lower, but remaining clear. "They said Miss Morgan is drifting in and out of consciousness." He paused, taking a deep breath before delivering the final blow. "And she keeps calling your name. Asher." The air solidified once again. The only sound in the study was the strained breathing of the three people within it. The news landed like a bombshell. Chloe Morgan, the one that got away from the original novel. The woman who drove Asher to obsession and ruin. A car crash. Emergency surgery. Calling his name. The timing was too perfect, the setup too cliché. It was like the opening act of a meticulously staged play. In Asher's arms, Ilara went completely still, like a statue flash frozen in ice. Even her trembling stopped. The chaotic fear and despair for moments before were put on pause by this new development, leaving her eyes empty and blank. Asher felt it clearly. The faint, struggling energy she'd had, born from his words and his touch, vanished the instant she heard Chloe's name. His arms, wrapped around her waist, now held only a cold, lifeless stillness. He looked down at her. Her long lashes were lowered, casting fragile shadows on her bloodless cheeks. She looked like a bird that had finally given up, waiting for its wings to be broken. The last spark of light in her eyes seemed to have been extinguished, leaving only an endless expanse of ash and emptiness. Standing in the doorway, Mr. Peterson felt like he was suffocating under the oppressive atmosphere. A thin sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead. "Sir," he prompted again, the hospital said, "the situation is not optimistic. They need family." He didn't finish, but the implication was clear. A choice was laid at Asher's feet. Go to the hospital and be with the first love who was hovering between life and death. Or stay here and face the accident that had created a new life, and the wife in his arms who was filled with fear and animosity, the woman he had just claimed as his property. A few seconds of dead silence passed. Asher's gaze remained on Ilara's lifeless face, his expression unreadable. Just as Mr. Peterson was sure he would choose to leave, Asher's arms around Ilara moved. They didn't loosen. They tightened. In a move that was more definitive, more forceful, he pulled her cold, rigid body fully into his own solid, warm embrace. His gaze finally lifted from Ilara's pale face and turned to the anxious butler in the doorway. His voice was flat, betraying no emotion, yet it carried an undeniable, ice-cold authority. "Peterson." The butler instinctively straightened his back, holding his breath. "Yes, sir." Asher looked at him, his eyes as sharp as knives. "You handle it. Use every resource at our disposal. I want her life saved." Every word was crisp and firm, not a hint of hesitation. But Asher's chin gently, almost possessively, brushed against the cool, smooth hair at his wife's temple. He felt her body grow even more rigid. His voice, when he spoke again, seemed to crack through the ice, letting a strange warmth seep out. It was completely different from the cold command he'd given Peterson. This was for the woman in his arms. "I'm not going." He added the words clearly, each one a stone dropped into a deep pool, sending ripples of disbelief through Alara's silent heart. After all, Asher's palm, with undeniable finality, came to rest once more on her cool stomach. The gesture was gentle, but it was backed by an unshakable resolve and a blatant, possessive claim. "My wife needs me right now." His voice was a low murmur, but it was loud enough for the stunned butler in the doorway and for the utterly petrified Alara in his arms to hear every single word. After Mr. Peterson left, the study fell quiet again. Alara's fingertips were ice cold, but Asher held them in his palm, slowly rubbing the warmth back into them. "Why?" she finally whispered, her voice as light as a feather. "I thought you loved her most of all." Asher chuckled, his thumb tracing the wedding band on her ring finger. "Who told you that? You? Or—" He leaned in close, his nose brushing her earlobe. "The Asher Vaughn who's already dead." Alara's pupils shrank. She snapped her head up, her gaze crashing into his bottomless, dark eyes. There was no mockery there, only a startling seriousness. "You." Asher kissed her trembling fingertips. "You knew from the first night I wasn't him, didn't you? That dumbass." He nipped her finger, leaving a faint indentation. "Would have never laid a hand on you." 3 months later, Chloe Morgan was discharged from the hospital. The first thing she did was show up at their door. Dressed in a pure white dress with long, straight black hair, she looked as innocent as a lily. "Asher," she said, her eyes red-rimmed. "I almost died." Asher was peeling grapes for Alara, who was curled up on the couch. He didn't even look up. "HM, I paid medical bills." "You're welcome." Chloe's expression froze. Her gaze shifted to Alara, whose baby bump was now a gentle swell beneath her loose sweater. "You too. I thought you got divorced." Asher popped a grape into his wife's mouth. "We didn't. My wife is pregnant." He said it so matter-of-factly. The tips of Alara's ears turned pink as she bit down on the grape, her fingers tightening on the sleeve of his shirt. Chloe suddenly lunged forward. "That's impossible." She was supposed to— Asher shot a hand out, catching her wrist with precision. His eyes were as cold as steel. "Miss Morgan, if you touch my wife again, your next stop will be a psychiatric hospital." That evening, Asher lay with Alara, his hand resting on her belly while they watched some prenatal education video. "Why are you being so well-behaved today?" he murmured. "Not going to ask me how I knew Chloe was trouble." Alara leaned against his chest, tracing the stubble on his jaw. "You figured it all out the day you tore up the papers, didn't you?" Asher raised an eyebrow. "That's smart, huh? Then guess." He leaned down and nipped her earlobe. "What I want to do right now." Alara laughed and tried to squirm away. "You can't. The doctor said the first trimester." Asher had already pinned her to the couch. "I'm just asking if you want to. We won't go all the way." His lips traveled down to her collarbone. "I can help you. Other ways." 8 months later, outside the delivery room, Asher slammed his fist against the wall, his knuckles splitting and bleeding. From inside, he could hear Alara's soul-tearing screams. "Save her!" he roared, grabbing the doctor by the collar. If anything happens to her, before he could finish, a loud, clear cry echoed from the room. A nurse emerged, holding a tiny, wrinkled bundle. "Congratulations, Mr. Vaughn. It's a beautiful baby girl." Asher didn't even glance at the baby. He shoved past the nurse and burst into the room. Alara was drenched in sweat, smiling weakly at him. "You idiot. I thought we agreed. You'd look at the baby first." Asher dropped to one knee by the bed, his hand trembling as he kissed her damp forehead. "Nope. You scared the hell out of me. We're never doing this again." Alara reached up to touch his reddening eyes. "Are you crying?" "I thought the great Asher Vaughn wasn't afraid of anything." Asher captured her fingers and bit them gently. "I'm afraid of you. Only you." 3 years later, at the Vaughn Enterprises annual charity gala, their little princess, dressed in a frilly tutu, was on stage playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star on a grand piano. Asher wrapped his arms around his wife's waist. Honey, let's have another wedding. We never exchanged rings at the first one. Alara turned to look at him. Asher, our daughter is 3. He nibbled her earlobe. I'll make up for the dowry. 10 million in cash, plus all my shares in the company. Alara laughed and pushed him away playfully. No thanks. That's so tacky. Asher pulled her tighter against him. Then I'll give you me. A lifetime warranty. Redeemable anytime. A spotlight suddenly swung over to them, and the entire room erupted in cheers and applause. On stage, their daughter shouted in her sweet, high-pitched voice, "Daddy, kiss Mommy." Asher dipped her into a deep, public kiss. As you wish, my little queen. End.